What if I told you that something sitting quietly in your kitchen right now could begin interacting with your body while you sleep? Not a pill, not a supplement, not something expensive or complicated. Just a small dried bud, the kind most people see as nothing more than a spice. And yet, for thousands of years, this tiny overlooked ingredient was used for something very different. Not just for flavor, but to support digestion, to freshen the breath, and to work with your body's natural systems in ways most people today never even consider. But here's where it starts to get interesting. Because when something this simple is used consistently, especially at night, your body doesn't react all at once. It responds slowly, quietly, almost like something is shifting in the background, without you fully noticing it at first. And that raises a question most people never think to ask. What actually happens when you take something like this and use it every night? For 7 days? Does your body ignore it? Or does something begin to change? In ways you only notice once you stop. Because what we're talking about today are cloves, and what happens when you eat 2 cloves before bed for 7 days straight. By the end of this video, you may start seeing this simple spice in a completely different way, but more than that, you may start noticing something else. How many small everyday things have quietly lost their meaning over time? Because there was a time when something like this wasn't ordinary. It wasn't something you used without thinking. It was understood, respected, used with intention. And this is where the story begins to shift. Because what you see today as something simple was once seen very differently. Cloves weren't just added to food, they were chosen, used in specific moments, for specific reasons. In some cultures, they were rare. In others, they were valued more than gold. And over time, that meaning slowly faded. Not all at once, but gradually. Replaced by convenience, by modern habits, by things that felt faster, easier, but not always deeper. And that raises a quiet but important question. If something was used consistently for generations, across completely different cultures, why was it used that way? And what did people understand that most people today never even think to ask? This is where ancient wisdom meets modern understanding. So if you're someone who's curious about rediscovering simple, natural ways to support your body, make sure you subscribe and stay connected. Because sometimes, the most powerful things aren't new, they're just forgotten. And what we're about to explore might be one of those things. Cloves come from the dried flower buds of a tree known as Syzygium aromaticum. Before they're dried, these buds are soft, almost delicate, with a reddish color that looks nothing like the spice you recognize. But once they're harvested and slowly dried, they transform into the small, dark, nail-shaped pieces you've probably seen sitting in a jar without ever thinking twice about them. If you look closely, each clove has a rounded top, almost like it's sealed, holding something inside. And in a way, it is. Because what you're looking at isn't just a dried plant, it's a concentrated bundle of natural compounds formed by the tree over time. Clove trees grow mainly in parts of Southeast Asia, especially Indonesia, where for centuries, these buds were harvested carefully, almost ritualistically. Because people understood something about them that most people today don't. And you begin to notice that difference the moment you taste one. That strong, warming sensation, the slight numbness, the intensity that spreads across your mouth. That's not random. That's your body reacting, responding to something active. And this is where your perspective starts to change. Because instead of seeing cloves as something you add to food, you begin to realize this is something your body can actually recognize, something it interacts with, something that doesn't just sit there, but does something. And that realization becomes even more interesting when you look at how cloves were used in the past. More than 2,000 years ago, in ancient China, cloves were not just a spice, they were part of court protocol. Historical records from the Han Dynasty describe something very specific. Before officials were allowed to speak to the emperor, they were required to place cloves in their mouth. This wasn't optional, it wasn't symbolic, it was expected. Because in that environment, every detail mattered. The emperor was seen as a figure of absolute authority, and entering his presence meant more than just showing respect on the outside. It meant presenting yourself in a certain state, clean, prepared, composed. Cloves became part of that preparation, not because of tradition alone, but because of what they did. They changed the breath, they altered the mouth. They created a noticeable shift that others could perceive immediately. And over time, this small practice became embedded into a larger idea. That what happens inside your body affects how you show up in the world. And that connection was already understood thousands of years ago. At the same time, in ancient India, cloves became part of a much larger system of understanding. In Ayurveda, one of the oldest healing systems in the world, cloves were not used randomly. They were classified, studied, placed into a structure that aimed to understand how the body stays in balance. In this system, cloves were considered a warming herb, something that could gently stimulate digestion, support circulation, and help the body move out of states of stagnation. They were often combined with other herbs, not as a quick fix, but as part of carefully prepared blends designed to restore harmony over time. So while one culture used cloves in ritual, another used them as part of a system. But then something else happened. Cloves began to move across oceans, across continents, through what became known as the ancient spice routes. And this is where the story takes a different turn. Because cloves didn't just stay in one place, they became one of the most desired substances in the world. Ships traveled thousands of miles through dangerous waters just to reach the islands where clove trees grew. Merchants risked everything to carry them back. And when they arrived in places like the Middle East or Europe, cloves were no longer just a plant. They became a symbol of value. At one point, they were worth more than their weight in gold, not because they were rare alone, but because of what people believed they could do: preserve food, protect the body, purify the environment. In a time before refrigeration, before modern medicine, something that could do even part of that wasn't just useful, it was powerful. In some traditions, cloves were used to help preserve food. In others, they were burned or infused as part of cleansing rituals meant to purify spaces and the body. And even though cloves themselves are not directly named in biblical dietary texts, aromatic plants with similar properties were used in sacred oils and purification practices described in ancient scriptures, which tells you something important. Across different cultures, different belief systems, different parts of the world, people kept coming back to the same plant, not once, not occasionally, but consistently. They trusted it, they used it, and they passed that knowledge forward, which raises a question that still hasn't been fully answered. If so many different civilizations placed this much value on something so small, what exactly were they experiencing that made it worth it? As you move from history into everyday use, the focus shifts, not on what people believed, but on what they actually did. Because cloves weren't something people thought about once, they became something people returned to, again and again, in small, simple ways that fit naturally into daily life. One of the most common practices was to slowly chew them, not quickly, not absent-mindedly, but with attention, allowing the natural compounds to release gradually, right there in your mouth. And the moment you do that, you understand why. That warmth, that slight numbness, that immediate shift in how your mouth feels, It's not subtle, it's noticeable, and over time, people began connecting that experience to what was happening deeper in the body, especially after meals, because digestion doesn't always feel smooth. Sometimes it feels heavy, sluggish, like your body is working harder than it should. And cloves became one of the small, natural ways people used to support that process. But it didn't stop there, because what you feel in your mouth was only the beginning. That same intensity, that same active sensation, is connected to what's happening inside the plant itself. Cloves contain powerful natural compounds, and one of the most important is something called eugenol. This is what creates that warming, almost numbing feeling. But more importantly, it's one of the reasons your body reacts to cloves at all. Because your body doesn't just taste it, it responds to it. Modern research has started looking more closely at this, and what scientists are finding is that cloves interact with your body in multiple ways at once. For example, they've been studied for how they affect the environment in your mouth, not by overpowering it, but by helping maintain balance, which is exactly how they were used traditionally. But the deeper layer is something most people never think about. Cloves are also extremely rich in antioxidants. Now that might sound technical, but the idea is actually simple. Throughout the day, your body is constantly dealing with stress, not just mental stress, but internal stress. From food, from your environment, from normal processes inside your body. And this creates what scientists call oxidative stress. You can think of it like this. Your body is constantly managing small amounts of internal wear and tear. And antioxidants are one of the tools your system uses to help deal with that. Cloves happen to contain a high concentration of these compounds, which means when you consume them, your body may begin interacting with that support. And this is where things become more interesting, because over time, how your body handles stress internally can influence how you feel externally, your energy, your digestion, your overall sense of balance. Researchers are also exploring how cloves interact with inflammation, which is another way your body responds to stress. Again, not as a cure, not as a treatment, but as part of a much larger system your body is constantly managing. And when you step back and look at all of this together, something starts to stand out. Ancient cultures didn't use cloves randomly. They were responding to something they could feel, something they could observe. And now, modern research is starting to explore those same patterns from a completely different angle. Which brings you back to the question that started this entire journey. What happens when your body is exposed to something like this? Not once, but repeatedly, night after night, for 7 days? And at some point, this stops being information, and it becomes a question, because hearing about something is very different from experiencing it. So imagine this for a moment. Tonight, before you go to sleep, you take something small, something simple, and you repeat it, not once, but for 7 nights in a row. And instead of expecting something dramatic, you just pay attention to what you feel, to what changes, to what doesn't. Because that's where this becomes real. So what actually happens when you do this yourself? Day 1. The first thing you notice is how strong it is. You place the cloves in your mouth, and almost immediately, there's a shift, warmth, a slight numbness, a taste that lingers longer than you expect. It's not subtle, it demands your attention. And in that moment, you realize something simple. This is not passive. Your body is reacting. Day 2 and 3. Now something more interesting begins. Not dramatic, but noticeable. You start paying attention after meals, how your body feels, heaviness, lightness, and you may begin to notice A small difference, not enough to impress someone else, but enough for you to recognize. And once you notice it, you can't really unnotice it. Day 4 and 5. By now, this is no longer new. It's familiar. And this is where patterns begin to form. Your breath feels different, cleaner, more neutral. Your body feels slightly more balanced, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, steady way. The kind of change you only recognize when things feel off again. Day 6 and 7. Now you've repeated the same small action. Enough times for your body to respond, and this is where it becomes personal. Because the most noticeable shift isn't always physical. It's awareness. You start noticing how your body reacts to things, food, timing, habits, and something that once felt automatic now feels observable. And that's where it changes. Not in what you add, but in what you start to notice. And if you feel curious enough to try this for yourself, keep it simple. 2 cloves in the evening, before bed. Chew them slowly, let your body respond. That's enough. Cloves are strong, so small amounts matter. If your body feels sensitive, start slower. And if you're unsure, it's always worth checking with a professional. But beyond all of that, there's something even more important here. For thousands of years,